would like to just address the community and address the media on some issues relating to crime in the community. There's a general concern about crime in the community. There has been, of course, for ages, but more recently there's been a lot of talk about crime and the theories out there about what the reason for it is. So citizens are right to be concerned about crime in their communities. Crime's been here as long as people have been here and will remain until people are gone. But crime is complicated. It's often seen as a simple bad behavior that can be punished to prevent the offender and others watching from committing that crime in the future. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. I think an example of it working, perhaps, is everyone watching today, everyone in the rooms probably received a speeding ticket at some point, and that kind of stings a little bit. So as a result, every driver in the nation, when they see a police car, will take their foot off the accelerator because there is a learned behavior there, a deterrent to speeding, following those speeding regulations. But we're not here talking about a simple driving behavior. We're talking about crime in the community. So prior to statehood, frontier justice prevailed. There was a territorial prison in Sioux Falls. There were a variety of inmates in Sioux Falls. The records still exist showing that horse thieves were put in prison, that people were in prison for sometimes very minor violations by today's standards at least. And but again, on the frontier, there was summary, corporal, or capital punishment for crimes. After statehood, the Constitution prevailed. Although it took some time for us and every state to acknowledge all of the people who should be protected by it, the Constitution prevails and remains the rule of law today. And America is imperfect, and South Dakota is imperfect, and Rapid City is imperfect because we are inhabited by flawed human beings, every one of us. That's why police departments exist. That's why the criminal justice system exists, to try to correct those behaviors and protect citizens today and into the future. Crime is an unfortunate part of society. So the common question is, why is crime on the rise? And I'm here to tell you there's two schools of thought circulating currently. One's based in reality and one's based in misinformation. The facts of the matter are that addiction and substance abuse is at the heart of many crimes that are committed in the community, addiction and substance abuse. Number two is that we have inadequate resources available for mental health and addiction treatment in our state. And number three is poverty. It's a long-standing belief, and research backs it up, that crime is higher in poverty-stricken neighborhoods, that there's an association or a link between poverty and crime. Number four, social isolation. I know you might be tired of hearing it, but the past 2 years have been a different 2 years than any other time in our lives. So there are more and more articles being published as time goes on about the effects of social isolation during the pandemic and outward risky or bad behavior today. So that is a fact of the matter. Related to that is the division over political issues and ideologies. This isn't science, but in all of my recollection, there's never been a time since the past 2 years where families are divided over politics and friendships are broken and marriages have been put in jeopardy because of political beliefs. The pandemic, these last 2 years, have amplified all of that and created a great conflict in our nation and in our communities. In addition to all this, we have law enforcement staffing shortages. And we've experienced this. We're experiencing it today, but we experienced it in to a great extent during the pandemic. When that happens, a lot of proactive police activity is put in a lower priority, and police then become people who respond to crises that already have happened. And so there's a link between proactive and visible law enforcement activity and a general, the general crime in the community. And the growing distrust of government and law enforcement. Somehow the people have taken a different approach to government in the last 2 years. The behavior among law enforcement organizations is deteriorating. The citizen behavior towards law enforcement officers is deteriorating. Law enforcement assaults and murders continue to occur and continue to increase. On the misinformation side, there's a false belief that, that governments like ours are taking a soft on crime approach. We're taking a soft-handed approach to dealing with crime in the community. And linked to that is us taking liberal or dark money to keep our jail cells open, our jail cells empty. Silly as that may sound, I received an inquiry not too long ago about the belief that the jail is half full because we're being paid by liberals to keep half of those jail cells empty. This is absolute misinformation. In fact, the jail population is higher than ever. There are no empty jail cells in the Pennington County Jail. Population there is up, continues to be up, and they're bursting at the seams. So if, you know, this misinformation campaign is in progress, and it's based on really the common denominator are the radical political beliefs that are fueling this. And the information is available. That's what's so frustrating. The information is available. The statistics are available, but yet the opposition to these facts get that data and skew it for their own messaging. So what can be done and who can do it then? Well, first we have to understand that most of the crimes that affect our community are committed behind closed doors. In a nation, in a state, in a community where we value property rights and the Constitution protects us, the authorities may not enter your residence without just cause. And so that means crimes committed behind closed doors are done in private. Other crimes are committed specifically to be out of the public view, to be done in secrecy. Burglaries and robberies and these type of things. There's a deterrent. The deterrent is don't get caught. So people are out there in the dark, they're on the darkest streets, they're not committing crimes while cars are driving by, and all this is done in secrecy. So the overall question is, how can a patrolling police car stop these type of things that are happening in private or in secrecy? One could argue that it's possible if there's enough of a deterrent created by strict enforcement, harsh sentencing, and so on, everyone will get the feeling that committing a crime is not worth it. That's false, and it's always been false. Crime is a symptom of society. It's a societal problem, and it requires a societal solution. And ironically, and sadly, the group that wants the government to crack down and solve crime is also the group that does not want the government meddling in social issues. We cannot have it both ways. So now we're going to ask Chief Don Hedrick to show the crime and call for service statistics.
Thank you, Mayor. So the last couple of years, I think we can all agree, have been super challenging for everyone. And your local area law enforcement, we've went through our share of struggles as well, whether it was working through the pandemic, civil unrest, violence, and the staffing issues that the mayor referenced. And I'll get a little more into that here in a minute. But I just wanted to provide some data today to help paint a picture of what has occurred over the last couple of years and some of the trends that we've seen not only here locally, but regionally and nationally as well. Okay, this slide, a lot of numbers, right? But hang with me, all right? The purpose of this slide is to show how Rapid City fared on crimes of violence over the last few years in comparison to the state and the nation. And we'll take some time for questions at the end. When you look at the crimes of aggravated assault, homicide, robbery, sexual assault, we can see a peak. And most of these categories peaked in 2020. And this is fairly consistent not only in Rapid City, but also in our state and throughout the nation. Unfortunately, we here locally are not alone in the spike that we've witnessed. It's probably also worth noting that aside from homicide here in Rapid City, these violent crimes had a downward trend in 2021. And I'll show a little bit later how many other communities continued to increase. And, as the mayor had referenced, many of these crimes occur behind closed doors, which it makes it incredibly challenging for us to have a deterrent factor. Okay, so we identified some comparative cities and some regions for perspective. And if we're talking about the crimes of aggravated assault, homicide, robbery, sexual assault, what you'll see is that they peaked here in Rapid City, and they started to trend downwards in 2021. Whereas many other locations, for example, the national cities averaging a population of 100,000, it went up. And places like Fargo, Aurora, Minneapolis, Denver, crime continued to trend upward in 2021, whereas here it trended downward for the most part. And, one of these charts is specific to murders and homicide. I just got to do a quick plug to our incredible team of detectives and investigators who take this super serious when this happens in our community. Over the last 3 years, we've had 29 homicides, and we've been able to clear all but 4 of those. And I think it's also important to mention, just because we haven't cleared those yet, they're still an active work in progress, and our detectives and investigators are doing everything they can to bring justice for the families. As a matter of fact, I'm hoping here in the near future we're going to be able to talk more about one of these 4 in more detail very soon. Also worth noting, when it comes to homicides, we've noted that 26 out of the 29 appear to have a tie to either alcohol and drugs. So either alcohol or drugs, or both. Okay, another very similar trend, talking about the crimes of rape and robbery. Most of the locations on these charts that we've identified, these crimes went up in 2021. In Rapid City, these went down in 2021. Again, another very similar pattern, aggravated assault and burglary. These went up in many locations. In Rapid City, they trended downward. And we thought it would be also important to mention, we've been talking a lot about crimes against people here, but when we're talking about property crimes like theft and stolen vehicles, we also noticed the same trend. Many locations, these crimes continued to rise in 2021. Here locally, all of these crimes decreased in 2021. And the mayor touched on why has crime increased? It's a pretty common question. We hear it a lot. This is a question still being actively researched by sociologists and health professionals and criminologists. And many believe it's a culmination of things. And, if you just take the pandemic, for example, and if you reflect on that in your own personal life, the turmoil that the pandemic caused for many, it caused our lives to change on a dime. And you think about folks that are in need of resources, and suddenly they're unable to access those resources. We know that people consumed more alcohol during the pandemic, and they had less access to mental health resources, and we know things like depression and anxiety increased during this time frame. For us here locally, something that we see is a lack of treatment opportunities for methamphetamine addiction. And it's probably worth noting, during this time frame, many communities felt a distrust for law enforcement after the George Floyd incident. It caused a rift in many places. And even here locally, We saw more protests that year, 2020, than I had seen my whole career. And of course, staffing issues. Many places throughout the pandemic and now are struggling with staffing issues, and your local police department isn't immune from that. We had a lot of turnover in the last 2 years. And I just attended a conference with other chiefs and sheriffs from South Dakota and North Dakota last week, and it was a pretty common theme. Turnover and finding and retaining good candidates. It's something that we're seeing throughout our region. So you might be asking, well, what are you guys doing about that? And I think we're lucky. We're in a pretty good spot where we have a good working relationship with our union and with city leaders. And this year, we were able to implement a competitive wage package to make sure that our officers are making the wage they should be making. And in addition to that, we worked with city leadership to add positions to the police department. And so this is a total shameless plug right now. We are hiring, so if you know of good people out there that are looking for a job, tell them to give me a call. I'd love to talk to them. One thing that we've also seen in other locations is departments lowering their standards to get more applicants in. And I'm here to tell you that's something that we're not going to do. We're going to continue to maintain our high standards because we've got to make sure we have the right people working here at our police department. One of our efforts to retain good people is our focus on wellness for our officers, and that's good for a lot of different reasons. Healthy, happy officers do better at work, they treat the public better, and we have kind of this mantra around our building to take care of yourself so you can continue to take care of others. So our wellness program is made up of many components, one of which is we have an on-staff psychologist, a doctor in our building that is able to work with folks that need assistance, and it's a free resource for our employees. It's a big deal. Not a lot of departments have a resource like that. And our officers are at the front row to life at times, life and death, and they see some very terrible things. You know, they're people too, and they're not robots. They need to be able to work through those issues and talk to the right people. Additionally, we have physical therapists that have some office hours in our building. You know, we found police work to be a full contact sport at times, and if you're not addressing low-level injuries early on, it can lead to greater injuries if left untreated. One thing we're very proud of is our peer support program. That is, people from all levels of our department are trained to recognize when somebody is struggling or needs help, and they're able to get those folks in our building connected with resources, and we know we've saved careers from that program. And in addition, we have our chaplain program that has been very helpful in tough times, and our fitness team. Fitness is more than just physical fitness. People that are fit there's a lot of mental benefits to that as well, and we take that very seriously at the department. Okay, so what are we doing about the crime issues in our community? So we're on the verge of being a smaller community moving into a bigger one. And when a community grows, with that growth comes an increase in criminal activity. Therefore, we are decentralizing some of our police resources, spreading out as the city continues to spread and grow. And you know, there was a lot of talk this last year about our Southwest precinct and why we're growing in that area with the amount of growth, specifically in that area where the building continues to occur. But we also have a substation at the mall where we have a unit operating out of. And just this month, we signed a lease with a property at the intersection of Knollwood and North Maple, where we're going to have some office space there this summer. And we're excited about that because we can really focus and help a neighborhood that needs resources, needs assistance from us. In addition, we work very closely with our federal partners to go after criminals committing crimes of violence. For example, our Project Safe Neighborhood Task Force is in conjunction with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Their primary focus is on the intervention of violence related to gang and drug activity. And since 2017, we have arrested 384 individuals who are tied to stolen firearms, felons in possession of illegal firearms, and drug involvement. We're holding violent criminals accountable. Many of our violent crimes involve drugs. Our multi-agency drug task force includes the Pennington County Sheriff's Office, Rapid City Police Department, and the Division of Criminal Investigation. And they're focused heavily on methamphetamine interdiction in Pennington County. Throughout 2018 to 2021, they've made 4,750 arrests. They've seized over 1.6 million, and they've taken 256 firearms off the streets and out of the hands of drug dealers, getting guns and drugs off of our streets. And with the introduction of dangerous drugs like fentanyl, back in September, our officers started carrying Narcan on their person. And since September, we've utilized Narcan 9 times with folks in our community, and we've saved lives utilizing this tool. Okay, just briefly wanted to mention our proactive activity that we've stepped up this last year. If you compare the first quarter of last year, so January through March of 2021 versus January or March of this year, our traffic stops are up 96%. Citations and warnings are up. Our sector policing efforts are up 15%, and our downtown foot patrols are up 17%. And we attribute a lot of this proactive time that we have. It's due to the work that, in part due to the work that Journey On is doing in our community. Since December, Journey On has helped us with nearly 2,400 calls for service involving those in need and folks that are homeless or houseless. And so thank you, Journey On. We appreciate that. Because of your efforts, we're able to focus on the policing issues that our community is asking us for. We utilize a sector policing model. Up here on the board are our sector lieutenants. They are tasked with getting to know their areas and getting to know the people, the problems, the concerns. They attend meetings, and they work with the community to address issues. And if you see these guys out and about, just know they are working their tails off. Many times they are away from their families to make sure that Rapid City is safer for yours. And if you see them, be sure to reach out to them with issues or give them a high five and tell them thanks for the efforts. Just briefly, I wanted to touch on the 3-pronged approach that we take in neighborhoods where violence is occurring. Not only do we utilize traditional enforcement, which might be officers stationed 24/7 physically in the area, intervening on criminal activity through traffic stops and subject stops, but we also work with management of properties to fix broken windows, graffiti, trash, improve lighting, making it safer for the good people living in the neighborhoods. But we also utilize community engagement, and we've done some really creative things with the help of some of our folks in the neighborhoods to take back their neighborhoods and building trust with the folks living there. So you might be asking, how can the community help? What can we do? And it sounds very simple and basic, but if you see something, say something. If something looks strange or odd, it probably is, and we need to get a phone call on it. We've had some pretty major cases solved by a simple phone call from a citizen saying, hey, something looks weird here. Also, I think it's important to note we gotta lock our doors, gotta lock our car doors. In 2020 and 2021, we had 943 stolen vehicles, and many of these were due to them being unlocked. Also, we had 242 firearms stolen from vehicles. Many of these vehicles were left unlocked with a firearm inside, and vehicles make terrible gun safes, so we really need some help here with this message and this effort. We gotta lock those doors. And lastly, I just want to note there are many mentoring opportunities here in our community. Many nonprofits could use assistance. Club for Boys, Girls Inc., Big Brothers Big Sisters, Cornerstone, Wavy, all of our social service providers. It's a good way to get involved. If you don't have time, donate money. If you don't have money, donate your time. It's easy for folks to, point out problems. It's much more challenging to be a part of the solution. And I think if we can all find a way to raise our personal standard, if we all find a way to do that, it's going to make Rapid City a better place. Thanks. I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. That was excellent. So, in summary, the barriers to reducing crime. We talked about one of them, difficulty staffing law enforcement agencies. That's one. Another difficulty is coordinating with our other government partners. In 2013, the state reformed the criminal justice system, starting with Senate Bill 70. That bill took years to get fully implemented, and along with that bill was a promise to use the dollars saved by not building prisons to go to support other programs such as treatment and also court service officers and that sort of thing. I think we've seen an underinvestment from the state in terms of treatment facilities. So also we have in our community, and we're no different than other communities, we have a constant supply of people who are prone to commit crimes. We are manufacturing criminals. It has to do with parenting, it has to do with the home environment, and it's predictable. Most police officers could point you to a house where children are raising themselves, where parents are uninvolved, where there's a high incident of sexual abuse, physical abuse, alcohol or other substance abuse in that home. That's the child's education growing up. That child is extremely disadvantaged coming out into the community and growing up to be an adult. Parenting is vitally important. And in South Dakota, we have the nation's highest percentage of working mothers. We are the #1 state for working mothers in the United States, where 8 out of 10 mothers are working outside the home. So then that helps to put the burden on daycare, other child supportive services, and a good number of these working mothers are single mothers as well. But then we run into this problem. There's a resistance in South Dakota to the concept of early childhood education. We are one of about 4 states now who refuse to even assemble an advisory committee to look into the benefits of early childhood education. The South Dakota legislature killed a bill in committee in 2018 that would have established such a committee, and some of the reasons given publicly were, well, the committee will cost money, and if they find something that we have to fund, that'll cost more money. And I'm here to tell you, and I'm challenging you to prove me wrong, that the most expensive thing we can do is to do nothing. This is a fact of life, and we are looking the other way. So why is this? Well, I'll tell you what my personal observation is from talking to a number of people. There's a common denominator among people who oppose early childhood education, and that is so-called conservative values. There seems to be a feeling that you cannot be conservative and support early childhood education because early childhood education is socialist, or it's liberal, or it's something else. I'll tell you what it is. It's expensive. It's expensive, and it takes police officers dealing generation after generation with hordes of kids who grew up raising themselves and are now part of the system. This is unsustainable, and we've got to stop it and start looking at reality, because I'll tell you there's 2 things. The analysis is very simple. There's the way it should be, and the way it should be is every child ought to have involved parents who are qualified to be parents, and every child ought to have a safe environment. Every child ought to have access to education and proper childhood development. That's the way it should be. But the other half of that coin, the other side of that coin, is the way it is. And the way it is reality. And there's a good number of children in our communities across America that are not afforded proper upbringing. And you can criticize all day long and say, well, why'd they have kids then? Well, why don't they give them away and let people adopt them? Why don't? Well, that's all cheap talk from the seats, from the bleachers. That is not reality. Reality is this problem exists, and it is burdening our communities, and it is causing crime and dysfunction in our communities. So what can you do? Well, first of all, you can support your children in their development. If you feel like you don't have time for your children or you don't have the proper resources, there are systems available to assist you. If you're addicted, raising a child, you owe it to the child to look into a treatment option or to find a different environment for them. You can also support your local law enforcement. These individuals in local law enforcement, whether it's police or sheriff or highway patrol or other law enforcement agencies locally, they are out here working themselves to death, trying to provide a better community, and they cannot do it without the citizens' support. And for crying out loud, lock up your stuff. Do you know how many hours of police response and investigation and evidence recovery, all of this kind of stuff? And we just heard 200 and some firearms stolen from vehicles. There's no excuse for that. Another thing we can do is we can reject the politicized conspiracies about crime. Crime is not political. It does not belong to a political party. It is not conservative or liberal. Crime is a fact of life and it's a fact of society. We have to deal with it on that level and keep the politics out of it. You can support increased funding if that becomes an issue. If we're ever able to hire all the police and other criminal justice resources we need, that will require additional funding perhaps. So you can support that. You can start thinking more on a societal level when it comes to crime and disorder in the community, rather than a cops and robbers perspective. This is not a simple crime and punishment issue, this is a societal issue. You can support new strategies and initiatives when they surface. And you can focus on today's infants and grade school kids. They need community support. So thank you for attending. We'll take, Chief and I will take some questions now if you have them.
And as a reminder, go ahead and use the podium.
CJ Keene, oh boy, News Radio KOTA. Just two quick questions, and I'm out of your hair. When it comes to the response from the people interacting with Journey On, how has that response gone for you?
I'll turn it over to the Chief for that.
Well, I certainly can't speak for everyone in that group, but what I can tell you is that Journey On is perhaps handling things, well, they for sure are handling things in a different way than what we would, and perhaps in a better way. And I'll give you an example. When we drive somebody to get assistance, whether it's substance use or whatever the case might be, we drive them, take them there, and drop them off, and that's the end. We're done. But with Journey On, they're doing the follow-up and the aftercare. They're showing up the next day, if need be, to make sure the individual they transported is getting connected with the services that they should be. They're making sure that they're attending the appointments that they were set up to do. And I gotta believe we're gonna start to see the ripple effect of folks getting connected with services in a better way. And we've already seen how Journey On has helped by taking some of these very low-level social issue related calls for service, and we've been able to then take our time and put it towards the things that folks in our community are asking us to do.
And this is just for whoever wants to take it. And this is totally anecdotal. I need to preface this by saying this. But I have a gentleman organizing a youth camp up in North Rapid. And he tells me stories of parents scared to send their kids to the playground or school or something, specifically because of the meth and because of the homicides. So the question is, what's the message to those parents anywhere in the community, but specifically those up north who are curious about that?
Yeah, I would agree. We had a rough year in 2021 up in that area, specifically the area that you're talking about. And as a result, we have staffed that area 24/7 with officers. And I'm pretty excited that we're about to have a little mini substation up in that area because we're going to be able to start up things like a neighborhood watch and have community meetings in a spot where they live. We're going to be able to bring more resources where they're needed. And you know, we have folks in that neighborhood saying, please, we want more of a presence. And what we're trying to do also is identify community leaders that want to help us out. You know, over the last summer, we had a March Against Violence, and that wasn't the police department putting that together. That was the community saying, we're tired of this, and we were there to help support and make it happen. And so, you know, I think the more good people that we can bring in to stand together against the violence in that neighborhood, the better. And that's what we're going to continue to try and do is focus those efforts.
Thanks, guys.
Hey guys, so I guess my question is kind of about the hiring process for the police department. And I know you kind of mentioned that in 2022 you have a plan to hire a certain amount of officers. And I guess you also mentioned that these are going to be quality officers. And I just want to know how that process kind of works. Are there a limited amount of applicants that you're getting or anything?
You know, when I applied for the police department nearly 20 years ago, I believe I tested with 300 candidates, and there were people coming out of the woodwork to test and be a part of the police department. Now we're lucky to get 20. Is that about right? And that's a big shift. I mean, it's a difficult, challenging job, and folks recognize that. So one thing that we're doing is we've just partnered with a marketing agency to get our message out there and to get it out to a broader group that we want good folks working here. And there are a lot of pretty cool things about living in Rapid City that folks can enjoy, namely the Black Hills. And we got to get that message out more, and we're working on that. But yeah, there is a process. We do have a testing process, and we then have a very super thorough background process. And we just believe that is so important. It's something we're not going to skimp on, because we've all seen the effects of what a bad police officer can do for a community. So for us, we would rather tighten our belts and work a little bit short for just a little bit until we can get the right folks in. And we just had a testing process last weekend. I'm told we had some super solid candidates in that group, and hope's on the horizon. We gotta tough it out a little bit longer.
Hi. I was wondering, on the information it said that 7 officers are going to be paid for through grants. I was wondering, after those grants expire, how the department plans to pay for those officers.
So typically what we'll do is we present for our budgeting process for the year, the following year. And what we'll do is when their grant positions are up, we will put that onto our budget for the following year so that city leadership can see what these folks are doing. And at that time we evaluate if there's still a need to continue to grow and keep them on our books. That's what we'll do. And my guess is that, if we continue to grow like we are projected to, we're probably going to keep those positions on.
I was also wondering if you would be able to speak to the decision to establish a substation in the North Maple Knollwood area as well as the mall, and if there is a possibility for a north precinct perhaps.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of what we're dipping our toe into right now with this concept. And we've had access to utilize the mall for a long time, but just the way it's set up, it's not always as easy to get out of that location as quickly as you would need to if you were working a precinct, so to speak. I think this will be a good test for us to have a foothold in that area, and we're going to have officers working out of that location this summer. Some of our school resource officers that work in the school will be assigned to work in that neighborhood. So we're going to get a good feel for response times and such for calls for service, and it could lead to a discussion for that down the road.
Last question, I'll let someone else jump in, sorry. There have also been complaints and concerns about a rise in gang activity. I'm not sure if those are warranted, but I was wondering if you would be able to speak to that and if there has been a rise or anything that the department has seen that you could speak to.
You know, we do have folks that we will encounter, that we arrest, that do claim gang activity, and it's something that we note and keep track of. And as far as specific numbers, I don't have that with me available, but since I've worked here, we've had individuals that claim gang affiliation, and we take that into factoration, because if somebody is saying they are and believes they are and they walk the walk, we have to treat that seriously.
All right, I have one question for you, Chief. You mentioned, well, part of it was that, what is it, the precinct, the smaller precinct that you have? One of them?
Yep, we're working on one, yep.
Oh, okay. So obviously crime has increased recently, and that's why we're here, to bring attention to what you can do to kind of alleviate some of them. COVID wasn't help because you had to self-isolate, the alcoholism, drug usage, all of that's pretty big. Based off of your experience on the field, you said 20 years, what have you noticed has been the most successful over time as far as trying to combat that crime?
So I think throughout the course of my career, that's changed quite a bit. We leaned solely on the traditional approach, where we would simply saturate an area and, stop any sort of illegal activity that we saw. And sometimes even a traffic stop can lead to bigger things, drug involvement, whatever the case might be. And over the years, we've been working with entities like the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and through our accreditation, we've been able to utilize best practices and see what are other places doing besides just the traditional approach. And for us, we've tried to boost our approach. So we're not just utilizing a traditional method, we're also utilizing working with the people living in that community, working with management, working with the good folks that live there to figure out what's important to them. So essentially, not just using the hammer alone, we're also working on building trust with the folks that live in these communities. Kind of a multiple approach on that.
Okay. So I know you said that about 20 years ago, when you were testing to become an officer, it was roughly 300 people that were eager to become officers, but now you say you can't even get 20. I mean, what do you think are some of the reasons why it's changed so dramatically?
Well, I mean, it's a super challenging time right now, and it takes a special person to want to go out into the dark and to chase somebody. It takes a special person to get kicked or spit on, and that happens. It happens regularly. And now with now we have folks that are utilizing cell phone cameras and putting it in the face of an officer when they're trying to do a traffic stop. And it just, you got to make sure that you're getting the right folks. And I think what we're seeing now is quality over quantity. Okay, so people that want to step into this field and understand all of these challenges that they're going to have to go through, you're finding truly dedicated people, and so it could be looked at as a good thing. We're dialing into folks that are doing the job for the right reasons.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
One more question, I promise. We're all here and this is public, but things are very different in private. And I'm just wondering, when it comes to these hard numbers on your guys' end, what's the mood in those meetings when this is getting discussed?
Maybe one of you guys want to answer this. No, I would say it's been a challenging time. Kind of how I started things out. I think what has been good for us here locally is we do have a lot of support for what we do, and I think it's because of we try super hard, and maybe our media folks can back me here, but we try really hard to be transparent and to try and look at things not like we shouldn't share this or that, but what can we share? Okay, if there's something we can't talk about, let's tell folks why, and then let's talk about what we can do. And I think that's helped with, that transparency has helped with our trust. But also, I think it's really just been crucial that we've been, directing people back to why they got into this profession to begin with. And most police officers will tell you they want to help people. And so when we're going through a tough time, really encouraging folks to look back and remember what brought them here, that drive to help folks, and it can help pull you through the tough times. And I got to tell you, I'm just so proud of the folks in our building. They work so hard, and they do the best they can under some very difficult, sometimes lose-lose situations. And I got to tell you, you have a great police department. You have some super dedicated officers, and we should be very proud of the work that they put in every single day and night.
We're on the carpet.
Hello. There was discussion that a number of the homicides over the past few years have been tied to substance abuse, both alcohol or drug-related or anything else. I was wondering if there were any initiatives or discussions with organizations for a city initiative or working with departments or other agencies to help get to the root of those substance abuses?
Well, that's a complicated question, and one of the things we've tried to initiate a few years ago was an early childhood education program in Rapid City and in South Dakota. That has been slow to get off the starting line because it requires support on a broader scale. But in many of the cases, the root of alcohol or drug abuse can be attributed to childhood trauma and childhood experiences. I'm not saying that's all of them, but so that's what we intend to do. That's what we try to do, is get to the root of these issues. But the current environment, whether it's policymakers or citizens, the current environment is not favorable for planning for the future in that way. It used to be just for a variety of reasons. Now it's for a variety of reasons plus political reasons. So that's always our intent. But the Child Protective Services and social services, I believe, is understaffed. They're overworked. There's great need out there. We have a university 45 miles from here that has a social work program, and we have very few social worker jobs in the area. So there is a lot to do, but I'm afraid everything I just said could be categorized by those in the community as being a liberal type of agenda. So that's where the conflict is.
You mentioned that it's not perhaps the right environment to establish something of those kinds of programs. What would be the right environment, and when would you say is the point at which that it needs to happen?
Well, I think the right environment could be created by accepting the data that exists on issues like early childhood education, to look at the states who have adopted these programs and to learn from their experiences. But I can't force, neither myself or the chief or anyone else in government can force acceptance of an idea on the general populace. So I think I'll go back to what the chief said just a few minutes ago. I think this is part of increasing your personal standard, increasing your view of these issues is important. And we can get by doing things just the way we're doing them until we're gone off this planet, but someone else is going to be stuck holding that bag. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we're planning for the future to lessen the burden on society then. And planning for the future and focusing on infants and children and this sort of thing, or focusing on all of the adults who are currently acting out in illegal or other risky behaviors. One can only be a short-term scenario. The other one's a longer-term scenario. That's where the most money will be saved. That's where the best results will be achieved. So, you're talking about the core of the frustration that we have here trying to address some of these issues. That there are many closed ears and closed minds out there in the community, and I wish it weren't the way. I wish that weren't a fact, but it is. So hopefully we're going to keep talking, we're going to keep trying, we're going to keep trying to help people understand the value, and hopefully it takes off. And it may have to be through attrition over time. Maybe a new generation will come up and be more open to these type of ideas. But it's frustrating that there are states out there who have succeeded in doing the things we're not allowed to do.
It was also discussed that there is a lack of treatment services, or perhaps not a lack, but not enough in the community. Is there anything that the city is working on to help with that, maybe something similar to the crisis stabilization unit?
Well, the city partners with Pennington County in all of the services that are available at the CARE campus and crisis stabilization, the crisis care center. A lot of these things have been established over the last 10 years, and many of them the last 5 years. There are many resources available, but it's a tip of the iceberg because it's still not looking globally. All of these resources, many of these resources, I should say, are designed to deal with a problem that is occurring right now and not geared toward preventing a problem in the future. And it's difficult. And then to bring the homeless discussion into it for just a second, there are many individuals who are homeless and also chronic alcoholics who do not want, will refuse treatment. So that's a separate issue, but it's also related because that population also requires a police presence, police attention, and there's a component of violence and other behaviors there as well. So we haven't found the right recipe yet between the number of available beds, the ease of an average person getting into those beds, and so we're still searching. It's hopeful we can deal with this over time, but we're going to have to stop trying to deal with it in the manner we are right now. We're going to have to open up a little bit.
Sorry, I thought I was done. A while ago, you attended a meeting with, I believe, 8 other cities in Washington, D.C. I was wondering about crime. I was wondering if there were any federal resources that were discussed and would be made available going forward.
Well, I'll touch on that briefly and then turn it over to the chief. Rapid City is one of about 15 communities nationwide that were invited to participate in a violent crime intervention program. And so I think leading up to our selection for this, they recognized that Rapid City is accustomed and willing to try alternative methods to solve problems. We were recognized as being a community that we have an accredited law enforcement organization. We have had a very high standard in law enforcement for a long time and a very high standard of community service. So for that reason, we were selected. Chief, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say that, we're trying to leverage our resources to where it's most needed. And if we're able to obtain help and assistance in that method, one thing that we've been trying to utilize is 24/7 presence in certain communities, certain neighborhoods where we've seen extreme violence. And we've been able to utilize resources to put towards those efforts. So for example, if we have officers on overtime working in that neighborhood, we're able to leverage it in that way. And I think that's good. I think, I think it's important for us to also remember what's working in another community might not work in ours. We have to take into factor our own unique concerns and issues. What's working in Baltimore, we're not going to be able to take a cookie cutter program and bring it here locally. We're going to have to adjust any sort of programming to our own specific needs.
And I might add on to that too. I was invited to Washington D.C. to meet with, there were about 8 or so other communities at the table with the president. And we talked about this violence intervention concept. Many of the examples given around the table were just the things that have been talked about here today, the youth mentorship and early child education and some of these issues. As far as federal resources being provided, there was an allowance for this type of program to be funded out of the CARES Act funding. You know, I thought that was it was a very important moment for us to get recognized as a community, to be invited to the table. It was made very clear at this meeting that each community has its own unique issues and will need to have a unique solution. And then following that meeting with the president, I came back here and there were people holding protest signs in the audience of a city council meeting that had determined, since I accepted an invitation to the White House, that I was a liberal and I was for gun control, and there were all kinds of political lingo used on these signs. Very disappointing, because I thought this was a bright moment for Rapid City, and it was made very quickly into another political moment for it. So we are working with all of the resources. And by the way, we do have follow-up meetings. We have a group of people assigned to Rapid City to kind of moderate and mentor us as we go through this program. We have regular meetings scheduled with them, which are primarily virtual meetings. But you know, so this is part of progress. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole puzzle. Any other questions from anyone today? Well, thank you all for being here. Appreciate your attendance today.